From the moment she first opened her eyes in Kensington Palace, nobody imagined that a small, shy girl would one day rule the largest empire the world had ever seen. Yet Queen Victoria, born on a tiny island nation, became the beating heart of an empire stretching across continents. Her reign transformed Britain into the center of global power, shaping politics, culture, and destiny for millions of people. Behind every royal portrait lies a story of love, loss, political battles, and the relentless ambition of a monarchy determined to shape the world from their distant shores. This is the tale of how one queen and the dynasty she led built an empire from the edge of Europe. One, the child who was never supposed to rule when Alexandrina Victoria was born on a quiet spring morning in 1819. Few paid attention. She was a small, delicate baby eighth in the line of succession, far from the throne, far from political importance, far from the storms of empire. Britain already had kings, princes, dukes, and heirs whose path seemed secure. No one expected the future of an entire global empire would rest on the shoulders of this tiny child wrapped in lace. But destiny has a strange way of rearranging power. Victoria was born into a royal family collapsing from within. The sons of King George III had failed to produce legitimate heirs. Infighting, scandals, affairs, and childless marriages plagued the royal household. It was as if the monarchy itself was shrinking old, dying, and unsure of its future. And so, ironically, it was the least likely branch of the family, the Duke of Kent and his modest German wife, Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, who became the monarchy's last hope. From the moment she entered the world, Victoria's life was marked by control. Her mother and Sir John Conroy, the ambitious advisor who hovered constantly around them, built what they called the Kensington System, a strict, suffocating regime designed to keep the young princess isolated, obedient, and dependent. She was forbidden from ever being alone. She slept beside her mother. She could not walk down the stairs without holding someone's hand. She could not play freely or make friends her age. Every lesson, every step, every glance was watched. To the outside world, it appeared protective. To Victoria, it felt like a cage. As she grew, servants whispered that she would break the system one day. Her tutors noticed her sharp memory, fiery curiosity, and surprising stubbornness beneath her quiet exterior. She devoured books on history, science, and geography, especially maps. Perhaps even then she felt the pull of something much larger than Kensington Palace, a world she longed to rule. But destiny rarely moves gently. When Victoria was just 8 months old, her father died of pneumonia. The monarchy's surviving heirs were aging, sick, and childless. One by one, they died off, leaving the British Empire staring at an uncertain future. By age 11, Victoria suddenly found herself the next in line for the crown. It was then that she learned the truth. During a lesson, her tutor opened a genealogical chart of the royal family. "I never saw before I was nearer to the throne than I supposed," she wrote later in her diary. She stared at the page, her name rising unexpectedly above uncles and cousins. A rush of fear washed through her, but beneath it, something sparked. A purpose. From that moment, she vowed she would be a queen unlike any before. But the world she would inherit was not yet ready for her. Britain in the early 19th century was a storm of contradictions. It was the engine of the Industrial Revolution, its cities glowing with factories and smog, its ships conquering trade routes, its armies expanding across continents. Yet poverty clawed at the working class. Children toiled in factories. The monarchy itself was struggling to stay relevant as Parliament grew stronger. To the young queen who faced a nation alone, the dawnlight that spilled into Buckingham Palace on June 20th, 1837 was gentle. But the weight that settled upon young Victoria's shoulders was anything but. At only 18, she stepped into a role centuries older than her ancestors' castles or thrones shaped by conquests, revolutions, betrayals, and the ever-shifting power of an island kingdom that had somehow managed to rule half the world. Yet in that moment, the girl who had grown up controlled, isolated, and overshadowed by her mother and Sir John Conroy, suddenly stood alone. For the first time, the palace hallways felt wider. The air felt lighter. The choices were hers. But with freedom came the harsh scrutiny of an empire. That very morning, seasoned politicians arrived expecting to find a frightened, hesitant child. Instead, they found Victoria standing firmly in her simple black dress, composed yet unyielding. Her voice was soft, but her gaze steady. It was clear within minutes. This was no puppet queen. Lord Malberve, Prime Minister, watched her with particular interest. He saw both vulnerability and a fiery determination beneath her calm exterior, a combination that reminded him of the great monarchs of old. Her first act of independence stunned the household. Victoria ordered that her bedroom be moved away from her mother's. It sounds small, but for a girl who had been followed, monitored, and suffocated every hour of her life, it was an act of revolution. Sir John Conroy's world shattered with that single decision. His grip over the future monarch, the power he had spent years cultivating, dissolved overnight. Conroy tried to push back. He demanded influence, titles, control. But Victoria had endured years of silent torment under the Kensington System, and she refused to be manipulated any longer. Their confrontation was whispered about 4 weeks, raised voices behind polished doors, footsteps echoing down stone corridors, servants frozen in place as a young queen stood up to the man who had tried to own her life. In the end, Conroy left Buckingham Palace humiliated, stripped of any authority over her. It was Victoria's first victory, but far from the last. As the months passed, she leaned heavily on Lord Melbourne. He was her tutor, her advisor, and the only person she trusted. He taught her how to govern, how the House of Commons wielded more power than kings once did, how to balance tradition with the rising tide of democracy. Their bond grew so close that the public began to whisper. The newspapers painted her as Melbourne's queen, suggesting she was nothing more than a young girl guided by an older man's hand. But it was Melbourne who helped her prepare for the moment that transformed her from a sovereign into a symbol. The coronation, on June 28, 1838, London became a river of cheering voices and waving banners. More than 400,000 spectators crowded the streets. Windows overflowed with people leaning out to catch a single glimpse of the new monarch. Victoria's carriage rolled slowly toward Westminster Abbey, the sunlight flashing against its gilded surface. The city roared for her, this young, untested queen who embodied hope for a new era. Inside the abbey, bathed in candlelight and incense, Victoria moved with a quiet grace. The ancient rituals unfolded around her. The anointing with holy oil, the ceremonial sword, the heavy crown placed upon her head. There were small mistakes like the ring forced painfully onto the wrong finger, but the imperfections only made her more beloved. She was young, human, and real. After decades of scandal and failing kings, Britain welcomed her like a fresh breath of air. Yet the throne was not kind for long. Victoria's relationship with Melbourne soon plunged her into her first major political disaster. The bedchamber crisis, when Melbourne's government collapsed and Sir Robert Peel tried to form a new one. He demanded that Victoria dismiss some of her ladies-in-waiting. C'est refused. These were not political figures to her, were her companions, the only friends she had ever been allowed to have. She saw Peel's demand not as a matter of governance, but as an attack on her personal life. Peel withdrew. The government fell apart, and the nation turned against her. For the first time, newspapers portrayed her as immature and stubborn. Protests erupted. Critics claimed she was unfit to rule. The political world realized she was still learning, still balancing emotion with duty. Victoria herself was shaken. She had believed that loyalty to friends was a virtue, but politics made no room for sentiment. Melbourne returned temporarily, but the damage was done. Victoria had been tested and found wanting in the eyes of many, and yet it was through this humiliation that she learned an essential truth of constitutional monarchy. A sovereign must rise above emotion. She must act not for comfort, but for the stability of the empire. Still, the loneliness grew. The throne was vast. The palace was cold. Melbourne was aging, and Victoria, despite her crown, was still young, and in need of companionship, someone who understood her burdens without trying to control her. That someone would soon arrive from across the sea. A quiet, brilliant German prince with steady eyes and a mind sharp enough to challenge hers. A man who would change her reign, her heart, and the very shape of the British Empire. His name was Albert, and he was about to step into her life and into history. 3. The Prince Who Reshaped a Queen in October 1839. Buckingham Palace stirred with a restless anticipation. A young queen lonely, despite the weight of her crown, awaited the arrival of a man she had not seen in years. Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha was no stranger. They had met when she was just a teenager. But now she was queen, and he was a foreign prince with no guarantee of a place in her life. Ministers whispered about political consequences, servants gossiped about romance, and the palace itself felt poised on the edge of something transformative. When Albert arrived, Victoria's reaction was instant and unmistakable. He was handsome, refined, soft-spoken, yet possessing a quiet strength that contrasted sharply with the loud, dramatic personalities of her court. His deep moral seriousness, his intelligence, and the earnest way he carried himself struck her at once. She later wrote in her diary that he was beautiful, sweet, and full of goodness. The feeling she had once dismissed as girlish admiration returned now with overwhelming force. This time, she was queen, and she held the power. And so, in a break from royal tradition, Victoria proposed to him. On October 15, 1839, in a private room inside Buckingham Palace, she confessed her feelings. Albert accepted without hesitation. Their engagement stunned Europe. Critics sneered that she was marrying a German nobody. Others feared she would lose control of her throne to a foreign influence. But Victoria did not care. She had spent her entire life surrounded by people who wanted to manipulate her. Albert wanted only to support her. They married on February 10, 1840, in a ceremony that transformed London into a vision of white and gold. Victoria wore a white gown, an unusual choice at the time, which unknowingly sparked a global bridal tradition still alive today. As they made their vows, thousands gathered outside the chapel, cheering as if they already sensed the union would define an era. Marriage changed Victoria profoundly. But Albert, he stepped into a role no one had fully prepared him for. As Prince Consort, Albert had no official power. The British government refused to grant him political authority. Newspapers mocked him mercilessly, portraying him as a burden, an outsider, a man living off British wealth. Even some members of Victoria's own household resented him. It was as though the empire wanted its queen to remain a symbol, unattached, untouched by foreign influence. But Albert was no passive husband. He devoted himself to understanding British politics, industry, and society. He studied the machinery of the Industrial Revolution, the parliamentary debates, the education system, the conditions in mining towns and factories. Slowly, he became one of Victoria's most trusted political advisors. His intelligence balanced her emotion. Her passion balanced his logic. Together, they became a ruling partnership Britain had not seen in generations. Still, their marriage was not without conflict. Victoria was fiery, impulsive, and emotional. Albert was rational, calm, and methodical. They clashed often. She wanted to rule with her heart. He insisted on discipline and structure. Their arguments were legendary shop words exchanged behind closed doors, doors that servants pretended not to hear through. But each disagreement strengthened them, shaping a leadership that was both passionate and pragmatic. Their love story was not delicate, it was powerful. Soon, children filled the palace. Victoria adored her role as mother, yet she remained queen before all else. Albert, meanwhile, embraced fatherhood with his characteristic devotion. But pregnancies weakened Victoria, and Albert gradually assumed more responsibility. He oversaw reforms, advised ministers, and worked tirelessly behind the scenes to modernize the monarchy. And danger lurked closer than anyone expected. 5. The fall of empires and the rise of a new crown. As the 19th century marched into the 20th, the British Empire towered over the world, 1/5 of the planet's landmass, 1/4 of the world's population. It was the largest empire humanity had ever constructed. And at the center of it all sat a king whose life began in the shadow of scandal. The making of a reluctant king, Edward VII, when Queen Victoria died in 1901. Her son, Edward VII, was already nearly 60. He had waited longer than any heir in British history. A lifetime spent enduring his mother's disapproval had made him a man of contradictions, charming yet insecure, bold yet uncertain, indulgent yet politically sharp. The world had changed, during Victoria's 63-year reign, and Edward understood something few monarchs of the past had grasped. The British crown could no longer rule by power alone. It had to rule by influence. He became the king of diplomacy, shaping alliances, not through war, but through dinners, conversations, social networks, public gestures, and carefully crafted symbolism. He modernized the monarchy's public image, transforming it from a stiff, isolated institution into one that walked the streets, visited hospitals, met ordinary workers, and embraced the fast-moving world of the 20th century. His most important achievement, the Entente Cordiale, a historic partnership with France that would redefine the balance of European power and prepare the stage for World War I. But Edward VII had no idea that the alliances he helped shape would soon plunge the world into the deadliest conflict it had ever seen. The Great War, where crowns crumbled. When Edward died in 1910, his son George V inherited an empire already rumbling beneath the surface. And then, June 28, 1914, a gunshot in Sarajevo, a murdered archduke. A continent set ablaze. World War I did not merely break nations, it broke empires, and it broke monarchies. The Russian Empire fell. The German Empire collapsed. The Austro-Hungarian monarchy dissolved. The Ottoman Empire crumbled. For royal dynasties, gone forever, swept away in the tide of revolution and nationalism. The British monarchy was one of the last still standing. But even it was shaken. Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm, the second cousin to King George V, came Britain's enemy. Public anger turned toward the monarchy's German roots. George acted swiftly. He changed the royal family's name from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to something unmistakably British, the House of Windsor, a rebranding that saved the monarchy. And while the war ended with Britain victorious, the empire was beginning to split at the seams. Self-determination movements ignited across India, Africa, and the Middle East. A new world was rising, and it had no place for absolute empires. The abdication that shook the world, Edward VIII. In 1936, Britain witnessed a crisis unlike anything before. King Edward VIII, charismatic, modern, beloved by the public, made a decision that stunned the world. He chose love over the crown. 6. The queen who ruled in shadows. Albert's death shattered Queen Victoria in a way no assassination attempt, no political crisis, no foreign war ever could. The moment his eyes closed for the last time, the world that had been bright, structured, and full of partnerships turned suddenly dark, silent, and unbearably cold. The palace felt haunted. His clothes remained untouched. His writing desk stayed exactly as he left it. Victoria ordered the servants to bring hot water to his dressing room every morning, as if he might walk through the door again. She slept beside his photograph. She mourned him for the rest of her life. For months, she could not speak his name without breaking down. For years, she refused to wear anything but black, and for decades, she ruled an empire in mourning. Her withdrawal shocked the nation. The widow of Windsor, Victoria, fled public life. She hid at Windsor, Osborne, and Balmoral. Parliament begged her to appear. Newspapers attacked her silence. Crowds demanded to see their queen. But Victoria, wrapped in grief, could not face the world. She once wrote, "My life as a happy woman is ended." Yet grief did not weaken her politically, it transformed her. Behind closed doors, she became sharper, more assertive, more determined than ever before. Ministers found themselves dealing not with a sentimental queen, but with a ruler forged in sorrow. She intervened more directly in government matters, pushing for policies she believed Albert would have supported: education, sanitation, military reform, and cautious imperial expansion. Britain did not know this version of Victoria. A queen who rarely appeared yet pulled more strings than ever, and at the center of her secluded world stood a surprising figure. The man who helped her stand again. John Brown, a Scottish servant from Balmoral, had known Victoria and Albert for years. After Albert's death, Brown became her closest attendant, yieldingly loyal, bluntly honest, and fiercely protective. He spoke to her not as a queen, but as a person. He made her laugh when no one else dared speak. He defied court officials who tried to control her life. He guarded her like a knight guarding a wounded queen. Rumors exploded across Britain. Pamphlets mocked her as Mrs. Brown. Courtiers whispered about impropriety. Victoria ignored them all. In truth, Brown gave her something she desperately needed: stability. He carried her messages. He organized her days. He encouraged her to walk, ride, and breathe again. He pushed her gently, firmly back into life. He didn't replace Albert. No one could. But he helped her survive Albert's loss. When Braun died in 1883, Victoria mourned him with a grief second only to Albert's. And yet the world kept turning, demanding a queen. The empire expands in her name. While Victoria hid from public view, Britain expanded aggressively across the globe. India became the crown jewel of the empire. Trade routes deepened across Africa. Australia and Canada grew rapidly. British technology, railways, and military power reached new heights. Politicians shaped these expansions, but Victoria's symbolic presence gave them legitimacy. In 1876, Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, her greatest political admirer, bestowed upon her a new title: Empress of India. 7. The Grand Conclusion. The Legacy of the Island Queen. Nobecientos words, asterisk, asterisk, Queen. Victoria's death in 1901 was not just the end of a monarchy, it was the closing of an era that had reshaped the world. Her reign, stretching over 6 tumultuous decades, bridged 2 completely different ages: the old world of kings and empires, and the modern world rising with steel, steam, electricity, and democratic power. Few rulers in human history ever witnessed such profound transformation. Even fewer shaped it. When the bells tolled across Britain announcing her passing, millions mourned not only in London, but throughout India, Africa, Australia, Canada, and the far reaches of the empire. The sun truly never set on her domains. From small coastal villages to royal palaces, people felt the weight of history shift. Victoria had become more than a queen. She was the embodiment of an empire. A monarchy reborn through one woman when Victoria first ascended the throne at 18. The monarchy was fragile, scandal-plagued, and dangerously close to losing public faith. Britain was restless, newspapers were brutal, and parliamentary power was rising fast. Victoria changed everything through discipline, duty, and sheer stubbornness. She re-established the monarchy as a moral institution. She didn't try to rule as an absolute sovereign. Instead, she adapted slowly, painfully to constitutional limitations. She allowed prime ministers more freedom while strengthening the monarchy's symbolism. Under her guidance, the British crown stopped being a political weapon and became something more powerful, a unifying identity for millions. A symbol of stability, a national anchor in uncertain times. This transformation allowed the monarchy to survive the Industrial Revolution, mass democracy, and global expansion. It is why the British royal family still holds power today, not in law, but in influence, tradition, and public loyalty. Victoria rebuilt the crown for the modern age. That is her greatest legacy. A family that ruled Europe through carefully arranged marriages. Victoria's children and grandchildren sat on nearly every important throne across the continent. German Kaisers, Russian Tsars, Scandinavian kings, and Balkan rulers were all connected through her bloodline. She became known as the grandmother of Europe. This network of family ties created a unique diplomatic web. Letters between Victoria and her relatives influenced treaties, peace negotiations, and alliances. Ironically, these same tangled family connections would later complicate European politics leading up to World War I, yet the cultural unity she fostered shared etiquette, royal traditions, language, and alliances left a permanent mark on European history. Where kings once battled, now cousins negotiated. Victoria engineered that shift. The empire that rose in her shadow, the British Empire, reached its absolute peak during Victoria's reign. At her death, Britain controlled almost a quarter of the Earth's land and population. Railways, telegraphs, and trade routes connected distant territories under one flag. This expansion brought both innovation and controversy. Innovation: modern governance, technological progress, universities and legal systems. Economic networks that reshaped global trade. Controversy: colonial exploitation, cultural suppression, resource extraction. Political domination: Victoria herself did not design imperial policies, but her presence gave them legitimacy. Her image printed on currency, stamps, statues, and government buildings became a symbol recognized across continents. She didn't just rule Britain, she ruled the imagination of the world. The woman behind the crown, Victoria's public image, was carefully constructed. Serious, dignified, disciplined, but privately, she was fiery, emotional, stubborn, and deeply human. She loved passionately. She mourned endlessly. She clashed with ministers. She adored her family yet fought with them constantly. She carried trauma, loss, anxiety, and fierce devotion to duty. Her marriage to Albert shaped her philosophy. Her grief shaped her fortitude. Her pain made her powerful. By embracing her flaws and her strengths, she became a figure people could relate to as she ascended to mythic status. Why the British royals are still powerful today. The modern British royal family survives because of the model Victoria created. 1. A monarchy rooted in symbolism, not political control. This allowed the crown to remain above political chaos. 2. A global identity built on ritual and tradition. Coronations, jubilees, ceremonies, all strengthened by Victoria's example. 3. A royal image tied to morality and stability. No scandals, no unpredictability, no instability. 4. Family as political influence through marriage, diplomacy, and public connection. 5. Cultural soft power. Victoria made the monarchy a brand long before the word existed. The reason modern royals still matter, from Queen Elizabeth II to King Charles III, is because Victoria redefined what it meant to be royal. She gave the crown a new blueprint, and it worked. The Queen who defined an age. Victoria's legacy is not a simple story. It is a story of progress and pain, empire and industry, tradition and transformation. She modernized the monarchy. She reshaped Europe. She empowered an empire. She survived tragedy after tragedy. She ruled longer and more effectively than almost any monarch before her. When said the world entered the 20th century with her memory guiding it. Even today, the echoes of Victoria's reign can be seen everywhere. In architecture, politics, royal customs, global connections, and the very idea of what it means to be British. From a small island, she helped rule the world. And though her crown rests in history, her shadow remains vast, complex, and unforgettable.